Doing great. Neil, how are you? Hope you're having a good week.
I know, and I know you're really into history, Greg, for sure. And this is going to be a really intriguing. Our guest today is Richard Leeds, a director, filmmaker. Richard, thanks for stopping by. You know what? The first question before I let Greg talk is ultimately the whole factor of filmmaking. What made you want to become a filmmaker, Richard?
Oh gosh, started at a very young age. You know, I think just the magic of putting putting pictures together. I think just there was something. I started making just still frames, putting them together. Getting access to a Super 8 camera in those days, that was a big deal to get access to a camera that could make Super 8. And I just was mesmerized from the first time I got access to a Super 8 camera. It was a big deal. It wasn't like everybody had a video camera. And so, perhaps possibly because of that limitation, it also made it a very magical process. And I just immediately gravitated towards it.
Wow. And Richard, if I could ask, what inspired you to take on V13? And was there a moment, during filming it that surprised you or deeply moved you in some way?
Yeah, what motivated to me, I had done another film with this writer, the writer of the play. It was based on a French play in English. The title would be Vienna 1913. We had done another thing together where he had had an unfinished screenplay. He was a psychoanalyst known as a playwright mainly. He only wrote one screenplay, which was unfinished, which he had written for Jean-Louis Trintignant, the great French actor who he had met at a party, told the story to, and then started writing it. And then Trintignant had lost interest, or I'm not sure what, but so I picked that up, and that won a prize at Tribeca Best Made in New York film. It had Frank Langella, Elliot Gould, Laura Herring. It was a lot of fun. It did really well. Um, he was newly married and came to New York and with his wife Axel, and I think he just loved the whole experience. I think he liked telling her, like, "See, this is my life." I tell you. Um, so we were friends, became close friends, and this piece of his really interested me. There was the element of a play within a play, and I thought that was important for the topic. A lot of, I mean, it's not about the Holocaust, but it is. I mean, it's about kind of the rise of a Nazi worldview, the beginnings of it before the First World War, and of course it ends. Uh, um, well, I shouldn't, but everything that follows from that. I
Yeah,
think we all
we
we
all
all pretty
know,
much.
and it's so interesting to look at that story and to look at specifically history, Richard. And I think as a historian, having an undergrad in history, I look at time periods, especially when you kind of paint it in a certain picture based on play into a film and looking at it's a play inside a film in so many ways, and be
Right,
able
right.
and to be able to see, Richard, the whole how people interacted that time. Are there similarities? History always repeats itself in certain
Yes.
aspects in the world, and we can all decide where in the world it does repeat, but ultimately things aren't different. They've happened many times. And how are people interacting at that time? How are they feeling at that time that led to what we saw after World War I?
Right. Well, I think in the case of Adolf, what you see him is, a young guy who's got all these problems and isn't at the beginning is not anti-Semitic. I mean, he's more focused on the Greeks as kind of an inferior people that are whose culture is polluting the German extreme ethno-nationalism that he's trying to promote. But then you kind of see him pick up the two kinds of anti-Semitism that are around him that he talks about and makes his cocktail. One is very extreme, very much about German tribalism, and the other one is kind of more kind of current cocktail party anti-Semitism that was just kind of very, very accepted in Vienna. And he kind of puts these together. So you see someone kind of absorbing what's around them, there's nothing magical or difficult to understand about what he takes. And then in terms of Freud, you see a young man going to see Freud who's in a way much more courageous than his friend Adolf, who, of course, in the course of the film, becomes Hitler. There's kind of a like a chiasmatic structure, like an X. One, Adolf doesn't start anti-Semitic, and by the end he's become Hitler, whereas the other young man in the beginning has this revulsion towards Jews that, in the course of it, we find has to do with family dynamics there, his maternal grandfather's shame and hiding of his Jewish family's name. And so, and who really, through working with Freud, abandons that, also abandons his friendship and turns on Adolf. So you see the dynamics of the time. You see how they take their way of seeing the world from what's around them. And of course, I shot it in New York very overtly. I took as, the New York City, it's the Statue of Liberty. Paris, it's the Eiffel Tower. Vienna, it's the Ferris wheel. And for that, I used the Ferris wheel, Coney Island. We shot it all here in New York, kind of wanting to emphasize that, just what you're saying, Neil, about the repetition, the ways in which history remains relevant, and how we have to take a stake in thinking about it. The classic thing one says about a Hollywood film is that it's a roller coaster ride, which means that the viewer's in a very passive position. But I think we really need to take ownership of history in a sense, and go back and work and think about its importance. And so by setting it in New York and making a more, on one level, playful use of the past, but also on another level, one that invites the viewer to be involved in thinking about the relevance of this history and just how is it pertinent to today.
So Richard, what scene or conversation while you were making the film in V13 that sticks with you, either emotionally or artistically, that you could share?
Well, I would say Alan Cummings' performance as Sigmund Freud, the scenes there, I mean, I think he really gave a unique and extraordinary interpretation of Sigmund Freud, one that brings out the kind of really innovative and courageous side of Sigmund Freud. And also, I would say that the scene of Adolf's play, when there's one scene where in the men's shelter, Adolf puts on a play, and the power of that scene, which kind of foreshadows the Holocaust. And I think the power of doing that was pretty amazing for everybody involved.
Definitely. And I never knew this, Greg, about Freud hanging out with Hitler. We don't talk about that in our history books that much, Greg.
No, we don't.
Well, of course, that's made up. But the scene where they met, but they were, this is the same period that they're both in Vienna.
I'm sure they met up at one point in time. You just don't have it historically.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's definitely possible that they passed, but conceptually, it's so interesting because, of course, Freud is Jewish, and his life was throughout affected by anti-Semitism. He wasn't able to pursue a career in medicine in the way he'd wanted to, and really his discovery, his invention of psychoanalysis really came from him, one door being blocked. He also said that being in a world where anti-Semitism stopped him from pursuing so many things, the other side of it was that he always thought for himself. He never felt he was part of the club. He never felt he could just, do what everyone else is doing. It pushed him. It gave him a foundation for really being an independent thinker, given that climate.
Hmm. Richard, what's one thing you hope viewers feel emotionally after watching V13 beyond just the facts of the events?
Oh gosh, it's a real film, Greg. I think you get that feeling from it. It's visually very striking. We shot most of it in the Bronx, and I think you get a view of New York City you rarely get to see. I mean, it's a very stylized, a very interesting film experience. And I hope they come away both with a fascination and an interest with that period of history, a kind of and the importance of looking at that time and the questions that are raised in the film, but also of a sense of seeing a really engaging film that on that level has given them great pleasure, even though the story is a very it's a very troubling story, and the fact that we feel a sense of repetition about it, that these fascist ideas are very, very current today, in my from my perspective. So it's a troubling story, but hopefully they've also felt that it's sustained itself as an enjoyable, engaging movie.
Now, working with Alan Cumming, you've worked with some talented people. I
Yeah,
checked your Wikipedia. Who would
yeah.
you compare him or say, the most talented people you've worked with in your career that are well known? Like, again, someone who's an Emmy, Tony Award winning actor in Alan versus other people that you've worked with in your career.
Yeah, like Elliot Gould, Frank Langella. Frank Langella is an interesting comparison because they're both film and theater actors. I mean, that's a very interesting thing about Alan Elliott, who, is I can't say enough great things about Elliot. Elliot's a film actor. That's really what he's done. Michael Imperioli has done theater and television and film. I'm leaving out television in my thinking right now, but of course, there's great work on television. Many of these actors. Uh, Frank Langella, though, comes to mind because of the theater and also film work. And that, of course, with this particular story was a great something that he brought to the role and to the way we did it. Um, you know, God, David Patrick Kelly, I just loved working with him. And but Yeah, but it's something about the versatility that some actors have. Wendell Pierce, also, that many people know from The Wire, particularly, but did Death of a Salesman. I think it was around a year ago in New York, and which was just outstanding. Um, I think that ability to do, because they require very different skills. In film we're doing close-ups, very subtle details. In theater, you really have to play with the body, your whole body, and you're wide all the time in a sense. So it's a very different training and expertise, and it's very interesting. The actors can do both, and particularly for this film, Alan's great, great, great work in Cabaret. And what comes to mind with Michelle Williams, who I've also worked with. Uh, really, really made him the perfect choice for this particular role.
If you could show, the finished V13 to one person in history, alive or past, who would it be?
Oh gosh, oh boy, that's a really great one. Um, and let's see, who would it have been? Um, maybe one of the surrealists, maybe Breton, Andre Breton, maybe the great German Jewish philosopher, either Hannah Arendt or Walter Benjamin, who's mentioned in the beginning, who loved people who loved both kind of surrealism, but also theater and cinema. Those would be some of the choices. Chaplin, the Great Dictator, which is such a great film about Hitler. Um, to get Chaplin, that would be, of course, would be a dream come true. Because I was also very inspired by comedies, making this Ernst Lubitsch's film "To Be or Not to Be," which is a comedy about the Holocaust, really. And a film with Jack Benny, starring Jack Benny, that didn't do well when it came out, but now is considered a great classic. Ernst Lubitsch, Billy Wilder, yeah, those have to
But
be also
okay.
possibles.
Now, Richard, your film, what does it compare to, in your opinion, as a filmmaker? What you've created, in comparison that's out there that people might know?
Uh, that's a great question. Well, gosh, it's interesting. It completely left my mind the whole time I was working on this film. Was until somebody recently mentioned it to me, which was Stanley Kubrick's last film, Eyes Wide Shut, which is Vienna, but it's shot in New York, right? It was a story set in Vienna before the First World War, filmed in New York City, and Alan Cumming is in the film. So I think there are elements of that. Um, there are elements of I think the work of Lars von Trier, uh, and gosh, it's such a good question, and I'm not really I'm not really doing a very good job of answering it.
I talked to a lot of musicians that say what their music is like, and I start thinking about you, and I start thinking about. I've been interviewing so many directors to talk about film versus television versus theater and the differences and things like that, and how you're able to almost be like a concert that the director is the one that makes it happen. What it looks
Yes,
like, how it's created, the whatever was in the mind as a director, you make it happen in your vision, your thought process. You probably look at other films as a film critic and a film
absolutely.
connoisseur in the way you develop things.
Yes, I mean, I looked at a number of films besides Ernst Lubitsch. I was very interested where theater is used in a film. Wings Over Berlin, of Wim Wenders' Seventh Seal, of Bergman, where it's a small carnival, but how theater can in film looks very rinky-dink, but that kind of gives it a power. It kind of shows that there's something beyond representation, that's beyond the edges of your film. And in telling the story of the Holocaust, that's often important, like Zone of Interest, Jonathan Glazer's film, where we see what's taking place beyond what we see is the actual Holocaust in a sense. And so this ability of theater within a film to kind of present a world of representation that has limits to it, that says there's we can only do so much even with the power of film. That was an that to me and Ernst again also with To Be or Not to Be, where again he uses theater. So that to me was an important um, aspect to this story that made me think this was a story I could tell in a way with the camera that would respect and do what I really wanted to do.
Greg, your final question is you have every time, every person you interview, you have this question. The final question. Go, Greg.
Great. Well, Richard, it's been a real pleasure to speak with you.
Same
And
here, Greg.
here's my question as a little coaching moment for me and anybody who's listening. Tell me, what do you feel is the most important thing in life you've ever learned?
Well, I would say that on the one hand, as a director, you have to both, there's a, it would be a, it would be an impasse, which is on the one hand, you should listen to everyone. And on the other hand, you have to stick to your guns, you know. I mean, I think that's the paradoxical thing about being a film director, that on one hand, you have to stick to your vision. And that means, you know, no matter what. But on the other hand, when there's a good idea, wherever it comes from, you have to be open to it. And that's kind of a contradiction. But within that contradiction, by being alive, you can generate life. So it would be living with that contradiction of kind of listening, of being open and listening to those around you very carefully, and at the same time staying true to what your own ethical compass.
Great. Thank you.
All right, Richard. We could check out the film in New York. It's in New York on Thursday, right? Is that correct?
Right.
Screening. And then when will it be available everywhere? Like different
Well,
places?
well, we're going to be announced. We have a whole number of screenings coming up, different parts of the country. Best thing to do is to check my website, Richard Leeds. That's spelled not like it sounds. Leeds. Richard Leeds. RICHARDLEDES.com. And V13. There you'll find information about each of the screenings. You can sign up for the newsletter. Also, where it'll be available online, various streaming services starting in May.
All right. Thanks, Richard. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
All right.
Neil.
That was a special
Thanks, Greg.
simulcast of the Neil Haley Show.